Good afternoon, Ms. Compton.
Good afternoon.
Let's do this. These are fairly directional mics, so for us to be able to hear you,
Bit
you gotta,
closer?
yeah, if you can actually pull the whole microphone up to you. That'll work real well.
Like that?
Yeah, that'll be perfect. Before I have you testify, just want to make sure I have this correct. Your name is Terry Compton.
Yes.
You're here testifying on behalf of yourself, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and you checked that you are neutral on the topic today.
Yes.
Okay. Do you have prepared remarks for the committee today?
Yes.
And then, you know what? I'm going to let you start with that, and then we'll ask some follow-up questions if we have them.
Okay.
Thank you for being here. Let me ask you this. When did you get into Austin?
About 11:30,
And where'd you come from?
Palestine, Texas.
Okay. Well, I want to say thank you for taking the time to be here with us today, and I will let you give your comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a great honor to be here testifying before this committee. My name is Terry Compton. I was one of the 12 jurors on the case of Robert Roberson's trial, and I took that position very seriously. Everything that was presented to us was all about shaken baby syndrome. That is what our decision was based on. Nothing else was ever mentioned or presented to us to consider. If it had been told to us, I would have had a different opinion, and I would have found him not guilty.
I, first of all, want to thank you for being here. And I know it was not an easy thing for you to get here. I know you have a lot of obligations back home. So I'm grateful for the time you spent. I know that Mr. Harrison had some questions for you. And I know some of the other members have questions for you, if that's okay. But I'm going to allow him to ask you questions first, if that's okay with you.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Representative Harrison.
Thank you, Chairman. And Terry, thank you for being here. You drove a little ways to get here. And,
Yeah.
my understanding is you've got a pretty busy life on the home front. Tell us just a couple sentences about that.
Yes, sir. I raised 3 kids of my own, and I have multiple grandkids, and then I ended up having to adopt my 4 youngest grandkids, and I am now raising them. We adopted them, me and my husband. My husband is 86 years old and has multiple heart problems and stuff. He has an LVAD on his heart to where his heart is being pumped off of batteries. I am 69, so having to take in a 13-year-old, 11-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 5-year-old straight. The younger 2 we brought home straight from the hospital. Needless to say, it is a very life-changing experience.
Yeah, without a doubt, and God bless you and him. So you and your 86-year-old husband are raising 4 young children right
Yes.
now. And you live in Palestine, but you took the time to drive down here. Did your husband come with you, or is it just you?
He was going to, but he didn't feel very good today, so I brought my daughter instead with me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for making being here a priority today.
It was
I think,
very much a priority
I think
to
it's
me.
important for the committee to hear your perspective on this, because you were, or maybe I'll ask it as a question. You were, and you mentioned this in your testimony, you were on the original jury that convicted Robert Roberson. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And one of the reasons I think it's so important we hear from you is because I hear a lot of people saying right now, and we've got to trust the jury in this case. And you were one of them, and the jury convicted him of murder. And you are one of the jurors that cast a vote to convict him of murder. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
So it's really important we hear from you. How, and I've got several questions, so as short as you can kind of make this, what made you feel that he was guilty of murder that led you to cast that vote of guilt for him?
Because Nikki was dead, and from what we were told about the bacon shaken baby syndrome and showing the pictures of her brain with all the bleeding up in her brain, there was no other explanation that was given to us of anything else that could have happened to her.
Yeah. So it would be fair to say, from your perspective as a juror, this case was about shaken baby syndrome.
That was the only thing that was discussed or told to us that it was about.
That's the only thing.
Only thing. Nothing else was ever told to us, ever discussed with us. Any other options was never told to
From the
us.
start of the trial, the middle of trial, and just to be clear, you were there for the guilt phase, and were you also there for the sentencing phase as well?
Yes, sir, I was there through it all.
And for the whole time,
The whole thing.
whole time,
Whole
shaken
time.
baby syndrome.
Yes.
Nothing-
Nothing else was ever told to us.
Nothing else. So I'm going to ask you a question anyway, just because it's written down. I want to ask it to you. Were you told anything about this little girl, Nikki, being beaten?
No. In the jury room, that was nothing we ever discussed. The only thing we ever discussed in the jury room was the shaken baby syndrome.
So you heard nothing about Nikki being beaten as an explanation for what you witnessed in the jury room?
No.
You never heard witness testimony or arguments from the prosecution that her father, Robert, or anybody else had struck Nikki, or that blows or hits to the head by somebody is how she ended up in that case in the hospital?
No.
Did you hear any discussion of sexual abuse in the trial at all at any time?
Yes.
Did you have to vote on that? Was he ultimately charged of sexual
No.
abuse? But to the best of your recollections, you and the jury, are you testifying here that you and all of your jurors heard allegations, and maybe I'll ask this, were they graphic allegations that you heard?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Did you ever see any witness or any evidence to corroborate those things that all of you jurors were told about allegations of sexual abuse?
No, all it was, what we were told, there was a nurse that testified. She testified that she was a certified sane RN, and that she had found these tears and everything else, and that is what we were told. She told this, and it was brought up several times, but then when it came time toward the end of the trial, they disappeared. They were never
The charges?
Charges. They were never charged. We never had any discussion of them in the jury room. There was no other type of discussion about it in any size, shape, or form. And then come to find out, she was not even a certified sane nurse.
And forgive me for the graphic nature of this, but you were told of sexual abuse to such an extreme that tearing was implicated and involved, and told to you, the jurors. The person who said this represented a certain certification that upon cross-examination they had to admit they were not even certified to be discussing the matter. Is that right?
Yes.
Is there any reason for you to believe that he was guilty of sexually abusing Nikki or any other child?
No. Except for what she said.
Yeah. So this case was a shaken baby syndrome case, start, middle to end. Is that your recollection?
Yes, sir. And also to my recollection, I believe the prosecution even got either it was a teddy bear or a baby doll and got it up and shook it to demonstrate to us what shaken baby syndrome was.
I'm really glad you mentioned that. Let's talk about that for a second. Because what is being thrown around right now, and we'll get to this more in a minute, people keep saying, the state right now, to defend the execution, they are saying that Nikki was beaten several times on the head. And you just testified a second ago, if I heard you right, you never heard anything about that.
No, sir.
Yeah. Do you have any recollection of multiple impact sites that Nikki had been beaten on multiple parts of her head?
No, sir. The only thing that maybe had been mentioned was she might have had a small bruise from where she fell out of bed.
Yeah. Were there any photos or discussions that you saw, or any evidence you saw, that made you think that anything of substance, and certainly of sufficient force to kill a baby or a 2-year-old, was on her head? Did you see any photos of severe bruising on her faces at all?
No.
In the photos you saw, did Nikki look like she had been beaten?
No.
I want to go to this teddy bear. Did you say it was a teddy bear?
I don't remember if it's a teddy bear or a baby doll or a child's baby doll or something.
Help me understand this. Why would a baby doll or a teddy bear be brought into the courtroom? What were they doing with it?
I think they were trying to emphasize the extent of what the shaking baby syndrome was and how violently he had shook it.
Can you describe to us, okay, so that was the point. What did they do with the doll or with the teddy bear? Can you just describe what you saw them doing with the doll?
They grabbed it by its arms like this, and they just violently shake, and just tried to give us an example of what the shaking consisted of.
And they did this, did they do this because they wanted the jury to understand what could have explained their theory for what was going on inside of her brain and what they believed happened to Nikki? So was the doll kind of like a substitute for Nikki?
They were trying to make it a substitute for Nikki.
Is that what you believe? You were seeing
That's
them
what I
simulate what
believed.
they believed
Yes.
happened to her?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did they ever simulate the doll being hit in the head with anything?
No.
Did they ever simulate the doll being hit in the head by Robert?
No.
Did they ever simulate the doll being thrown against anything?
No.
Did they demonstrate the doll being hit in the head in any way?
No.
So the only thing you saw that simulation with that doll on was being shaken. Is that right, or is that
That is
wrong?
correct.
Do you remember if the defense counsel objected to any of this at the time?
No, sir.
Well, you don't recall, or they did?
No, he didn't.
Okay.
Did they talk about, if that was the case, was there any discussion about damage to other parts of Nikki? Because, if you're shaking like that, was there any discussion about other injuries that might be intuitive if that were to happen? For example, fractures or neck tissue damage?
No, sir.
Nothing about a neck damage or any other part of her body?
No, sir.
Okay. Do you have, based on what you heard, and you sat through the whole trial, do you have any reason to believe that Robert was a violent person? Is there anything that stuck in your mind about that, based on everything you heard?
No, sir.
Were there any alternatives that you, the jury, any alternative explanations, I should say, to what could have explained what you were seeing from the medical evidence regarding Nikki, other than that she had been shaken?
No, sir.
And I jotted this down, but during your testimony, I want to make sure I heard it right, or maybe it was during one of your answers a second ago. You mentioned something about the deliberations in the jury room, and you were in there deliberating with your jurors.
Yes, sir.
What were you discussing when you were in the jury room deliberating with your jurors?
The only thing that we would basically discuss was the shaking of the baby and the head injuries with the bleeding and stuff, that they showed us pictures for where they had cut her skin away from her brain, where we could actually see the hoe shape and the bleeding on her brain. And they sent those pictures around for all of us to look at. And that's what we would be looking at, was all the bleeding in her brain. And that's what they told us had been done from the shaking so violently, it had burst those blood vessels.
And I want to peel at that. I assume the pictures were rather hard
Graphic,
to
yes.
view. And they were after the autopsy?
Yes.
Okay.
Or during, after.
During or after, but okay. Was there anything else that you can recall, you and your fellow jurors, discussing when you were in deliberations in the jury room, other than, was this child shaken to death?
No, sir.
You'd have no recollections of anything else discussing this child being beat, hit, or otherwise abused?
No.
Okay. I want to go to the medical history now, because that has come up a lot in this case. What did you know about her case? What did you know about her medical history? I'll phrase it that way.
The only thing that we were told as jurors is that she had been sick that Robert had taken her to her pediatrician, I think earlier in the week, and he had given her Finnegan. A couple of days later, she had been running a high fever. I believe we were told about 104. He had taken her to the emergency room. Again, they had given her some Finnegan with cough syrup in it, codeine. And he'd taken her back home again. And then the next thing we were told is when she had rolled off the bed, she, I guess, was okay. And he put her back in bed with him. He woke up again. She was unresponsive. And that's when he took her to the emergency room.
So prior to basically starting 48 hours out from her death, did you have any knowledge of her medical history?
No.
And would you characterize, because I don't want to misrepresent what you just testified to there, but in the days leading up, so the 48 hours roughly, you knew about it. There was a doctor visit, hospital visit. And by the way, was it your understanding he was the one taking her to get medical care?
Yes.
On multiple occasions?
Yes.
In the last 48 hours of her life?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Was there anything that you heard at trial that led you to believe that she was severely sick?
No. I just thought what I took it as being is that I thought she basically had the cold, running a high fever. I thought she was probably pretty sick, but nobody was ever figuring out what was wrong with her.
Okay. But was there a lot of discussion in trial about her extensive medical history?
No.
Okay. I would like to ask you a few things because I think it's really important. I want to ask you a few things that we now know, and I would like to hear you just let us know if you were aware of this type of medical history for Nikki. Were you aware that there was a CAT scan done that showed only a single minor impact site to the head that had only a small amount of breathing? Did you ever see this CAT scan?
No, sir.
Were you aware, or did the jury see, CAT scans and autopsy photographs that showed only a single impact site of the head with only a small amount of subdural blood and brain swelling that would have been, in fact, completely consistent with a short fall?
No, sir.
Okay. Were you aware, was the jury aware of a post-mortem toxicology report that the medical examiner, Dr. Irvin, did not consider that showed she had toxic quantities of Finnegan and Finnegan with codeine in her bloodstream at the time that the autopsy was performed?
No, sir.
I'm going to take a quick tangent here because these drugs now, are you aware that they now carry what's called an FDA black box label?
Yes, sir, because I know the pharmacy I go to won't even carry it these days.
Yep. That wasn't the case back then. And I'm going to read just a couple statements to make sure everyone understands what we're talking about when we're talking about FDA black box warnings, because I want to know if you knew this at the time y'all made your decision. Were you aware at that time, in 2002, that Finnegan tablets and suppositories may lead to, quote, potentially fatal respiratory depression?
No, not then.
Were you aware that Finnegan tablets and suppositories in patients with compromised respiratory function, such as sleep apnea, should be avoided?
No, sir, not then.
Were you aware that caution is now labeled, this is the official, this is from the FDA, caution should be exercised when administering Finnegan tablets and suppositories to pediatric patients 2 years of age and older because of the potential for fatal respiratory depression?
No, not then.
And were you aware then that excessively large doses of antihistamines, including Finnegan tablets and suppositories in pediatric patients, quote, may cause sudden death?
No, not then.
Yeah. Nikki had been prescribed these drugs, these cough syrups, that do metabolize into morphine. And this was in conjunction with the fact that she had a severe respiratory infection. Were you aware that she had a severe respiratory infection?
No, sir.
Okay. Are you aware of the evidence that has established that Nikki's heart, after she was admitted, was resuscitated even after her brain had already become brain dead? It's called non-perfused. But that blood thereafter, over the course of 2 days, was being pumped through her resuscitated heart to her brain, but it didn't have the ability to end the brain Did you know about this at all? And did anybody ever tell you that this could have possibly explained all the blood that was up there?
No, sir. From what we were basically under the understanding of, that when she got to the emergency room, she died sometime later that day. We were never told she was put on life support or anything like that, and actually survived for 2 more days.
So really quick, so I want to pull at this. You testified you saw these autopsy photos where the dura had been pulled back, and you saw all of the horrific blood up there, and you were told that was a result from shaking, but you were never told that for 2 days they had been pumping through her artificially stimulated heart blood up into her head.
No, sir.
Okay. Are you aware that there's of evidence that after Nikki was moved to Children's Hospital in Dallas, she was receiving epinephrine and 3 other drugs that stimulate blood flow and raised her pulse to over 200, adding to the blood flowing in and under the scalp and accumulating in the subdural space, yet it was unable to enter the brain? Did you know about that?
No, sir. Like I said, I thought she had died there at Palestine Hospital later that day.
Were you aware that when the medical examiner, Dr. Irvin, conducted an autopsy, she observed an accumulation of subdural blood, but that the medical examiner made no attempt to reconstruct past events to assess how that accumulation in the subdural space of her brain had occurred during Nikki's hospitalization, and that despite expert medical witness to the testimony, she determined that that blood was a sign of multiple impact sites, even though that's not consistent with anything that's outside of on the exterior of her brain. Were you aware of any of this?
No, sir.
Okay. Are you aware of the evidence that is now well established that Nikki, who had been very ill for most of her life, had high fevers during her last week, and you might have mentioned you knew about the fever? Are you aware that she had an unidentified respiratory infection that included double pneumonia, both viral and bacterial? Were you aware of this?
No, sir.
Were you aware that the pneumonia had advanced to the point of sepsis?
No, sir.
Were you aware of her having any blood clotting conditions or disorders that might have impacted how well she or how easily she bruised, and that could have impacted brain activity subcutaneously?
No, sir.
Okay. Were you aware of the evidence and the witness testimony that I have heard directly from a forensic lung experts that testified that her pneumonia had progressed so great over the period of probably 3 weeks that he didn't understand how at the time of death her lungs would have been capable of even absorbing enough oxygen to maintain life?
No, sir.
If you had known that, would that have made a difference in how you voted in this case?
Yes, sir.
How big of a difference?
Very much difference. I would have found him not guilty.
In 2002, were you aware that Mr. Roberson had autism?
I was not aware of it in 2003, the day of the
The
year
trial
of
was
the
2003,
trial.
that's right. And this is important because I have had law enforcement testify here to this committee that he had a really flat affect. How would you describe his demeanor at trial, and did that have any impact on your views of his guilt or innocence?
It didn't have a whole lot, but I'm going to say it probably did have some. He just basically sat at the table, didn't look at us, didn't pay how much attention, just basically stared more or less straight ahead.
Did you find that odd?
It was kind of odd.
Would it have struck you as less odd if you knew he was had been diagnosed as being on
It
the
probably
autism
would have,
spectrum?
because I would have explained what his behavior was.
Do you remember, going back to his attorney at the time, do you remember his attorney, was he arguing more that Robert was innocent of any crime, or was his focus more on what type of punishment he should receive? How would you talk about his defense attorney? How would you describe it?
I thought he was more worried about what punishment he was going to receive. I think he more or less accepted that he was guilty of the shaken baby syndrome, and he was just more worried to try to get him the lesser punishments.
Yeah. Did he ever the whole trial, did the defense attorney ever present you with other explanations for the shaken baby syndrome triad, the swelling brain, the retinal hemorrhaging, and the subdural bleeding? Did he give you any other explanation that could have explained those three things?
No, sir, that's what made it so, more or less, this is what it is, because he gave us no other options or any other type of options that we could have considered.
Would it have made any difference to you if at the time, if you had known that there are many other things that can result in all three of those triad of symptoms?
Yes, it would have. It gave me something else to have considered.
So you considered nothing else?
Nothing else, because nothing else was presented to us.
So you saw the three symptoms, shaken baby syndrome, the prosecution said it, and the defense attorney said it. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. So just one last time, nothing you and I just got done discussing, all that medical evidence was not presented to the jury, and you were not deliberating on that in the deliberation chambers.
No, sir.
Tell me about your history on this in recent times. Are you aware that he had an execution date set in the past few months?
Yes.
How'd you hear about that?
I actually read it on my phone because I keep a bunch of news feeds and stuff like that, because I like to keep informed of what's going on.
So you heard about it in the news? Mm-hmm. Okay.
I've also kept up, when he's had different hearings at different things it comes across, and I guess because I was on that trial, I have always kept up with things that has been going on.
So you've paid attention to it over the last 20 years?
Off and on, yes.
Yeah. What was your reaction when you heard that they had set a new execution date for him?
It kind of got my interest more so then. But then when I started reading about all these other things coming out about the pneumonia and the sleep apnea and the double pneumonia and all this extra stuff that has just now started to be coming out that I've read about, or maybe it's been out but I just now recently read about, it got me even more thinking, and I started thinking back about all the things that I knew about that went on in the trial, and I just realized, and I just finally came to the conclusion, he was an innocent man. And I just, in good conscience, I could not live with myself thinking that I had a hand in putting an innocent man to death.
Wow. So this had to be emotional for you. When you came to that realization, what kind of things did you do? Did you have discussion with your husband or other family members about this? How was your emotional reaction?
I had a very big discussion with my husband and with another friend of mine. And there would be times that I'd be talking about it with my husband that I would literally start crying about it because I felt that emotional about it.
What made you so emotional that you started crying?
Because I just couldn't think about killing a man, and that's how I looked at it. My decision 21 years ago was getting ready to come to realization, and I literally, in my eyes, was killing a man that I knew was innocent, and I was going to have to live with that.
This must have weighed on you over the last few months.
Very much.
Well, for what it's worth, not a question, but just a statement. I'm confident I'm confident in this. I can speak for everybody up here. We're all humans, and nobody would expect you to be judged on 2024 knowledge in 2002, 2003. Okay. You are only responsible for what you knew at the time.
Yes.
I need to bring this back to very present day because we've had a lot of developments in the last few hours, last few days, that I would like your take on.
Okay.
As someone who was on the jury. When this committee issued our subpoena, something that, just as a matter of fact, if we had not done, he almost certainly would be dead right now. There was a lot of litigation that has started, a lot of arguments. And the government, the state, and in this case the Attorney General's office, made an argument on the day that we issued this subpoena, I can't remember if it was that day or the next day. They began arguing that Robert Roberson's case was not a shaken baby case. I would like to read you a couple quotes.
Okay.
This is from somebody in the office of the Attorney General. The evidence supports the fact that there were multiple blunt force impacts to the child's head. How would you respond to that claim?
I would like to know where they got their information from, because that is not true.
Let me get rid of the rest of this one quote. And there was a history of abuse from this particular inmate against this child.
Again, I would like to know where they're getting their information from, because that is nothing that was ever brought up during the trial or at any other time.
There's more to this quote. Quote, shaken baby syndrome just doesn't play a role in this case. It's just not the central feature of this case.
Me being at the trial and in the jury area and the jury room, that is all that this case was based on, was shaken baby syndrome. And even the prosecution's star witnesses that they would have brought up, psychologists, doctors, all of this, the only thing that they would discuss in their testimonies and all of this was shaken baby syndrome.
Yeah. I'm going to hold something up right now. I don't know if you can read it. So I'm going to read you the first half of this, all right?
I have bad eyes, so you're going to have to get something over here closer.
That's okay. I can read this to you.
Okay.
Actually, no, I have a copy. Can she be provided a copy of that? All right. This is from an official pleading from the Office of the Attorney General when he was asking the Supreme Court to reconsider our subpoena. I'm going to read the first part of this. And before I do that, I'm going to ask you a question you've already answered. Mm-hmm. You were a juror on this case.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm going to read the first half of this. A Texas jury convicts Roberson of beating his 2-year-old daughter to death.
Not
Ma'am,
true.
Is that what you convicted Robert of over 20 years ago?
No, sir.
How sure are you?
100% sure.
Who would know better, you or somebody in the Office of the Attorney General right now?
Me, because I was in the jury. I was the jury, and I'm the one of them that made that conviction of shaken baby syndrome.
How does it make you feel seeing these statements by the government right now as somebody who lived through every day of the trial?
It has pissed me off very much.
I'm going to wrap up now because I'm certain my colleagues have questions.
And also, too, it has pissed me off about our prosecutors in Anderson County, because I heard they testified that this is what it was. And personally, the prosecutors now was not the prosecutors back when the trial went on. Prosecutor back then was Doug Lowe, and his assistant was Mark Calhoun. So how do they even know what went on?
And I think there was at least widespread sentiment up here when the district attorney testified that she did not come prepared, and nor did she demonstrate even a basic level of knowledge of the facts in this case. So I'd like to wrap up here and let folks...
I have to say, she is not very well thought of by a lot of people in Palestine, because she basically has no knowledge about her job most of the time.
Okay. All right. I'm going to summarize a couple things. Couple very quick closing questions and move on to my colleagues.
I will tell you one other thing.
Yes, ma'am.
To help your committee.
Yes.
Palestine Medical Regional Center is not the best hospital to take your kids to get anything done. They have a bad history of misdiagnosing people and everything else. And so that does not surprise me that they probably misdiagnosed Nikki and did not get her the proper treatment and do the proper treatments when they should have.
Thank you for sharing that. That is helpful as we consider all the aspects of this case. Thank you.
And
very
I know
much.
that for a fact. My husband fell off our back deck. They took him into the emergency room. They did a CAT scan of his head and his neck. They put him in for dehydration. He spent 4 days there. Had him up walking around doing physical therapy. I got him, picked him up. He's talking all nut crazy to me when I got him. I called our family doctor. They told me to take him to Tyler. I did. They did another CAT scan of his head and neck. Come to find out, he had a fractured neck. I got the CAT scan from the hospital. I took it to our primary care doctor. He's seen the fracture. I called the hospital and started raising Cain with them. They sent it out to a third party. 3 weeks later, I get a phone call from the third party. They said in the CAT scan from the hospital, he had a fractured neck and wanted to make sure I had gotten him and taken him to get some help. That is how good our hospital is at looking at CAT scans, diagnosing, and taking proper treatment care.
And the care and the attention to detail and the maintenance of records certainly played a central role
That's
in
what
this
I'm
case.
saying.
So thank
That's
you
how
for sharing
come I'm
that
saying.
perspective. Okay, I just want to summarize a couple things. So just
Okay.
tell me if I'm right or wrong, because I
Okay.
don't want to mischaracterize anything you said here. I'm going to run through a few things real quick,
Okay.
and then we'll let some other folks have a chance to talk to you. You were a juror for the entirety of the trial, both guilt and sentencing phase, correct?
Yes, sir.
This was, according to your testimony, a shaken baby case, and only a shaken baby case. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
You never believed and still do not believe that Nikki was beaten by anybody whatsoever. Is that correct or not correct?
Correct.
You did, however, hear discussions, very graphic discussions, of sexual abuse of Nikki.
Yes.
And the discussions involved her father being the person that did it.
Yes.
But they were completely unsubstantiated, and the charge was ultimately dropped. Is that correct?
I don't think there ever was a charge of sexual assault.
Okay. But nonetheless, you heard these unsubstantiated, graphic claims in the jury. You and your fellow jurors heard this,
Yes, sir.
and you never voted on it.
No.
You are now rejecting here today the new claim that Nikki was, quote, beaten to death.
Yes.
You knew very little about her relevant medical history at the time of the trial, and if you knew her full history, that would have mattered a lot to you. Is that correct?
100%.
And you're telling me that his defense attorney for the entirety of the trial never gave you one single possible or plausible explanation for what could have caused the 3 symptoms that they were telling you was shaken baby syndrome. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you never heard a single argument or any bit of evidence that this was not shaken baby syndrome.
No.
All right. 3 questions. Did the jury hear everything that you needed to hear to make a correct decision in this case?
With the evidence now, no.
Knowing what you know now, did the jury get it right?
No.
Knowing what you know now, do you believe Robert Roberson murdered his daughter, Nikki?
No.
How strongly do you feel about that?
100%.
Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Harrison, thank you. Ms. Compton, I'm going to ask other members if they have questions for you. I just want to follow up on one thing, and more of a statement than a question. It takes a lot to confront a very challenging situation like this. I know it does not make you feel comfortable that Robert's sitting on death row, given what you know today. And there are people, when they're confronted by difficult things, they put their head in the sand because it's easier than dealing with it. And I'm grateful for you making the trip here and telling us your feelings. And it's okay to say you're pissed if you are, because that's what we wanted to hear. Because the exact reason that this legislature created a law to go back and make sure that someone got a fair trial is because we don't get to get back inside the head of the jurors. We want to protect them after the fact, just in case something happened that was a mistake. But the courts have refused to do that. And your testimony here today gives us the opportunity to get inside that jury room, to understand the way you think and to understand the way that you feel. You are exactly correct about your analysis here. And your testimony is exactly what we needed to know that our law is not working. So I want to tell you, I am grateful for you coming here on a day's notice to talk to us. That's important, not just to Robert, not just to this committee. It's important to the entire state of Texas and the justice system that we have. It is going to impact so many lives that you will never interact with. And I want to say thank you for that. Members, do we have any questions for Ms. Compton otherwise? Yes, Mr. Cook. Vice Chair Cook, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony today. Thank you for coming to Austin, and just wanted to ask you a couple of questions. And so Earlier, you talked about the either the baby doll or the teddy bear that was being shaken. And so that was an example of where the prosecution was showing you what happened in this case, right?
Right.
Yeah. So if the court were to, if the judge would have excluded any testimony or any evidence being presented at the trial that had nothing to do, basically everything that had to do with shaken baby syndrome would be eliminated. So if I can just ask you to kind of just erase that from your memory. What other evidence did you hear of any type of physical abuse?
None.
And with regard to the sexual abuse, it was discussed at the beginning of the trial, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Would it be impossible for you to remove that from your mind? I mean, as you said here 20-something years later, you still remember him being accused of sexually assaulting his 2-year-old daughter, correct?
Yes.
Right. So it's fair to say that it would have been impossible for you to have considered it while you were sitting in the jury room. You would have had that knowledge.
We had it in our minds, and I think that probably we didn't discuss it per se, but I think it was in the back of every juror's mind that happened.
Let me ask it another way. If he had been previously convicted prior to this incident, if he had been previously convicted of sexually assaulting a minor, would that have impacted, would it be impossible for you to have not considered that in evaluating the evidence?
No, it probably would have weighed heavy.
Okay, thank you.
Members, do we have any other questions? Yes, Ms. Morales.
Thank you so much. Your testimony today is incredibly powerful, and it's going to create positive change in our state. One thing that has stuck out with all of the testimony that we've heard today is that the child was given 2 very strong medications. I've taken both of those medications in my lifetime, and I don't take them now because they're very, very strong. And it's interesting what you said about the medical community there in Palestine. So I guess my question to you is, during that time of the trial, did it ever occur to you, or did it ever stand out in your mind that these medications were very, very strong and that maybe they shouldn't have been prescribed to a child? And to be honest with you, I don't know how I felt about those medications during those years because, medicine has evolved during, the last 20 years. But I'm just curious if that, if you questioned that at all at the time of the trial.
No, I don't think we did, because that many years ago, it was such a common drug that pediatricians or doctors, prescribed for costs and this type of thing back in those days. I know previous down the road, they have changed what they do about all of that. But back in those days, I don't think it was something that we really considered it being too out of line of that being prescribed for a 2-year-old.
Wow, and to have them both at the same time, it
Right.
just...
We just didn't, it's not
couldn't
something we
imagine.
really thought about.
Thank you so much.
All right, Ms. Compton, appreciate your time and thank you for being here. I don't think we have no further questions for you at this time. If we had other questions later down the road, do you mind if we reach out to you?
No, sir.
Okay.
I'm free anytime.
All right. Thank you.
And thank you all for having me and listening to me, and hopefully we'll get this right the next time around.
That's the point. Good luck with those grandbabies.